I'm Matt with Banded Together, and I'm here with Randy, a renowned voice teacher from Chicago. As you'll see, his story is one of achievement and success, but also loneliness, addiction, and disappointment. But his story doesn't end here. In fact, I believe it'll ultimately be one of hope and redemption, a true comeback story. With Banded Together, we are coming alongside Randy to support his journey of transformation, and we invite you to join us. If you feel moved to give, we are helping Randy raise funds for recovery and renewal. Just click on the link in the description below. Also, you can leave him a comment of encouragement. And last but most importantly, we invite you to pray with us and intercede on his behalf. Thank you in advance for being a blessing. This is Randy's story.
I get out of rehab. Instead of being able to come home, I was isolated in a hotel room for a week. And isolation is like the one thing they tell you to absolutely not do coming out of inpatient. But that was not my choice. I was put there, and you know, I relapsed. I mean, it was a situation that made it highly probable that was going to happen.
So, tell us your name and where you're from.
My name is Randy Buescher, unusual last name. I'm from Chicago.
Okay. Were you born in Chicago?
No, I was actually born in Houston, Texas. And then we lived in Pearland, which is outside of Houston, until I was almost 4. And then we moved to Tulsa. So I have lived in Oklahoma before. I went to kindergarten and first grade there. And then my dad in 1969, he worked for Amoco. Well, it was actually Standard Oil back then. He got transferred to Chicago, which, man, as a little kid, only knowing the South, I did not want to go. I was like throwing hissy fits, like losing my friends and everything. And my dad made it sound scary because he said we were moving up with the Yankees. I'm like, what, Reggie Jackson's going to be our neighbor? But we moved, and we lived in a suburb of Chicago, about an hour outside, called Glen Ellen. Now, my mom was always forward thinking, so we would go into the city once a month because she wanted me to know it, and I loved it. So when it came time for college, I went to DePaul because I wanted to live in an urban setting. I didn't have much desire for traditional campus life. I wanted to explore urban life, and I just really took to it. And up until about 2 years ago, I'd lived in the city proper until then, and then kind of became a modern day vagabond, not by choice. And we'll get into that later.
Yeah. So what year was that when you were in Chicago? Did you move to Chicago?
1969. And then I lived there through 2 years ago. I lived in the suburbs until 1980. And since 1980, I've lived in the city.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little about your experience with music and when music became part of your life. What's like your earliest memory of music?
When I was like 2. I mean, I've been singing since I was probably even younger than that. When I was a little kid, the Andy Williams show was a big deal. And I used to live for that show. And I'd sing along with it. And I just would naturally sing a lot. And then when I was in 4th grade, it was a few years after we moved up here, I joined this rather well-known children's choir, the Glen Ellen Children's Chorus. And if the Chicago Symphony Orchestra needed a children's chorus, we were always the chorus. So I was performing under some major batons as a kid, and was even a soloist as a child with the orchestra. Then I majored in music in college, and was singing professionally in Chicago Symphony Chorus and doing a couple of big church gigs and performing at like cabaret type clubs around town because I like singing the Great American Songbook. And around 30, I started teaching. And I started because I wasn't making any money at this company I was trying to run. And my girlfriend at the time was a singer and a voice teacher. And she suggested I start teaching. And she made it sound like the worst job in the world because all she did was complain about it. But I'm like, why would I want to do something that makes you so miserable? I started on a Saturday with like 6 students, and within a few months, I had 40. And I was teaching kind of like everyone else at that point, same technique. But then I made some big changes, which we'll discuss.
Yeah, talk about that. Talk about what's you teaching like everybody else. What's the moment where you start teaching different?
Well, this is true in any voice studio. The vast majority, you do have males, and I've had many more male students than most voice teachers do. But a lot of times, the majority of your students are going to be high school or a little younger females. And the way most teachers teach, the technique is geared towards singing classical music. And in the female voice, in classical music, you have different parts of your voice, and the top part is called head voice. Well, in classical music, they start trying to bring that heady quality down lower and lower, and they never quite get into the speaking voice, which is chest voice. If you were to speak the way the women sing in that part of their voice, you'd sound like Aunt Bee from the Andy Griffith Show. And that's just not a very modern sound. So for more modern singing, which I would consider musical theater or anything pop, the female has to come out of chest. And a big reason of that is because the voice use needs to reflect the way women are viewed now. Because when you look at classical teachers and read the books on pedagogy, the words they'll use to describe female chest voice are crude, crass, vulgar, or masculine. Those statements have nothing to do with function. Those are all value judgments. And those are judged by the values of a sexist 19th century male. And because they wanted the voice to sound feminized as low as possible because it fit their idea of what a woman should be. But women are different now. You know, they're viewed differently. They view themselves differently. They've gone out into the world more. They've entered what were traditionally considered more masculine theaters within society. And the voice use has changed to reflect that. So it doesn't sound so cultivated. It sounds more connected to speech. So realizing that I'm teaching these girls, and I'm like, I was using the standard repertoire books like the 24 Italian songs and arias. And I'm like, these girls don't really want to sing this stuff. Now, do they? And I'm like, no, I didn't want to sing that stuff. But that's what you're given usually. And I'm like, what do they really want to sing? I said, they want to do musical theater or pop. And it's like, and I'm not a snob. I listened to that music. I liked it. But I asked myself, okay, realizing what their real goals are, and it should be my job for them to realize their goals through me. What do I do? Because I don't know how to put together this type of voice. So I did research into various teachers that specialized in non-classical singing, and I liked what Seth Riggs had to say. He's taught Stevie Wonder and Michael Jackson and Madonna and Annie Lennox and Carol Burnett and like 120 Grammy winners and stuff, winners of the Metropolitan Opera Contest. So I went out there and observed him and took some lessons and met Courtney Love while out there. But I picked up on what he was doing and what the difference was real quickly. And I came back to Chicago, changed the way I taught, and it was the best thing I ever did for my students and for me, because the successes really started piling up and got more and more popular. I got too popular for a while.
Talk about a little bit about that, like what's some of the successes and some of your proudest achievements in terms of
Yeah.
as a voice teacher.
My proudest is when young students get into a university level musical theater program, because it's not easy. And I knew I was an outlier with my success, but I had no idea how much. The average acceptance rate into a university level musical theater program is less than 10%. I mean, you're looking at like Ivy League figures. And I've been doing this over 30 years. Still got my boyish good look, so. I've had at least 100 students audition for these programs. And the acceptance rate out of my studio has been 100%. So that's when I realized how far out of whack I was against the rest of the competition. And that actually concerns me, because what is going on in these other places? You know, that's putting in that less than 10% includes like my 100%. So you're looking at some teachers that probably are lucky to have anyone ever get into these programs. And these kids really want to do it. And they probably could have. But musical theater requires musical theater training. And you need to do what's best for musical theater. You don't start dancing around the outside of it. If you want to sing on stage as a female, why are you going to go take lessons with an opera singer? Because no one's going to hire you if you end up sounding like the way your teacher wants you to sound. Why would you do that? But people do it all the time because that may be all they have available to them at the end of the day. And I want to try to fix that in Oklahoma City. I got a little bit of a mission here. I'm like John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd from the Blues Brothers. I'm on a mission from God. Seriously, though, I feel like I am.
That's amazing. I believe it. Who are some of the people maybe you have taught, or what
Well,
awards have they won?
I've worked with multiple Tony Award winners. I probably have had most success in musical theater, even though I've had a lot of success in pop. I've worked with multiple Tony Award winners, Grammy Award winners, Dove Award winners. Dove Awards, if you don't know, are like the Grammys for gospel and contemporary Christian. And Jeff Citation winners, that's like the Tonys of Chicago. And Chicago is a huge, huge theater town for people that don't know that. It's the second most important theater town in the U.S. My students have won competitions. I've worked with artists on every major label. I've worked with some of my students have gone on to be TV stars. I got one that has a really big part on Chicago Med right now. So I've taught my students that became TV stars. I've worked with Broadway stars, the whole gamut, you know, and then aspiring artists.
So, and back your son, he's done.
Oh, Nate?
Yeah. Do you feel like you feel comfortable talking?
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, you think there's anything else I want to talk about more?
Yeah.
You know.
Let's talk about your son a little bit.
Well, it's weird because I was just saying how I have a track record of preparing young people for the professional industry and then going on to success there. My son, Nate, he's 17 now, and I've played a part in his development as an artist because in my job beyond teaching technique, especially with young kids, sometimes I have to try to get them to think like artists or to access that part of their personality, which they may be scared of. But Nate was never afraid of it. Nate has always been comfortable in his own skin. He showed unique talents and insights at a very young age. It was obvious he was just had a real affinity for dancing, and that's borne out. I mean, he danced professionally for the Chicago Bulls for 4 years. He had interesting insights as a little kid, and he liked things that a lot of kids wouldn't, that more of a creative type would be drawn towards. And so I watched some movies with him early. I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but it was stuff like this that made me go, So I started watching the old Universal horror films with him, like Bela Lugosi as Dracula and stuff, because I wanted him to know stuff that happened that just wasn't 5 minutes ago. And surprise, surprise, he loved the movies. So after we watched Frankenstein, we got done, and I'm like, he's 2. I'm like, what do you think, Nate? He goes, I feel sorry for the monster. I'm like, that's unusual for a 2-year-old to pick up on that. And then we watched the rest of them. He picked up on stuff. And then I watched some stuff that would be should have been way beyond him. When he was 3, I watched Sweeney Todd with him. I'd seen it on stage. The crazy old blonde woman, I did not, if I'm spoiling this for you, I apologize. The crazy old blonde woman you see on the street all throughout the show, I didn't figure out it was his wife until the very end, like most people. The first time he saw her on the street, he goes, that's his wife. I'm like, oh my God. And then I watched Blade Runner with him. And Blade Runner goes over the heads of a lot of adults, because there's that question that's there, but it's not obvious. It's about Harrison Ford's nature. Is he a replicant or a human? I didn't get that the first time I saw it. That never crossed my mind. 5 minutes into that movie, Nate turns to me, he goes, Dad, is Harrison Ford a person or a robot? And I'm like, oh my God, what I got my hands full of here. But if he has that much insight into human nature and be able to see stuff like that, to me, that was a sign he might be a good actor. Because you have to have insights into humans and the characters to be able to portray them correctly. And if you're not insightful, you can't act. And I'm like, and plus he was so outgoing and comfortable in his own skin. I'm like, let's see what happens. We never pushed him into it. We just like, let's see what happens. And he really loves doing it. So he's never had to be pushed. We don't even have to encourage him. He just does it.
What are some of the things that you mentioned Chicago Bulls, or some other things that he's been part of?
Well, he started when he was 2. His first job, he was the lead on a national TV ad for the relaunch of Weebles. Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. And he was doing a lot of print and a lot of television work. It was all commercial. The first time he ever stepped on stage was when he was 7. And it just wasn't any stage. One of the most major theaters in Chicago is Goodman. And every year they do a production of A Christmas Carol. And it's a holiday institution, this production in Chicago. Every performance is sold out. There's like 70-something performances. And so he played Tiny Tim for 3 years. And he shot his first pilot when he was 7, where Paula Patton played his mom. He's been in a whole bunch of pilots since then, but pilots don't get picked up but like 10% of the time. So he had one picked up the series, which ran for a year, but within the last year, he's done a movie with Scarlett Johansson, and he got cast as one of the stars on a new Disney show. So we're very happy about that, and we're happy to see his work pay off, because his kid's work ethic is, well, you saw his documentary. I mean, his days are insane. I don't know how he does it.
Amazing. I watched with my daughter. We watched the Apple TV Circuit Breakers, and he was on there and didn't even know it till she kind of discovered that recently. And sometimes like, hey, this is your son.
That's neat.
Yeah, we watched that.
Uh-huh.
How cool is that?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna kind of pivot a little bit now.
Yeah, sure.
And when did things in Chicago kind of start going wrong?
Well, my studio started diminishing in size about 10 to 12 years ago. It was too much at that time. I was teaching like 90 people a week, and the money was great, but I was burnt out, and my quality of teaching was suffering because of it, because I just couldn't get into it as much as I was because the days were so long. But if I'd realized what I realize now, I most likely would have been fine. I had a big chunk of my studio were high schoolers, all within 1 to 2 years of each other in age. And all the new stuff I got, new inquiries, was all word of mouth. And a big part of that group of kids was a bunch of younger women that were cast in a show at the American Girl store. I mean, everyone knows American Girl. The store in Chicago and New York used to put on a musical twice a day, and all the kids' parts were double cast. And so I was teaching like half that cast, so that was a big chunk of it. Well, there were adults in the show, and the adults in New York wanted to take the production equity, and Mattel just said, forget about you, and they just shut down the show. So I lost that. But they were still with me, because these girls were serious. I was still getting word of mouth, but I was getting nothing new through American Girl. And then they all started graduating. And I didn't realize at that time how big of a chink in my armor I had with my studio population by having everyone be basically the same age, because then they all leave at the same time. So I probably lost half my studio at least through that. And then, unfortunately, to cope with that, I met a guy named Jack Daniels, who I wish I never met. I just wish I never met that guy. And over time, that became a real problem. So I've been in rehab, and that's part of the reason I ended up in Oklahoma City, which I'm actually grateful for very much. I met incredible people down here. They're going out of their way to help me and believe in me, and we're all on the same page as to what we want to accomplish down here, and we're gonna do it. So I'm glad I'm here, and I feel very welcome here.
Yeah.
Don't like the wind.
Yeah, we're glad you're here too, Randy.
Yeah, thank you.
So about 10, 12 years ago, studio start struggling some,
Yeah.
a lot maybe, and turned to alcohol.
And then my marriage started deteriorating on top of it. And that's been I miss my family. But it is what it is. It takes two to want it and make it work. And right now there's only one of us that wants it and try to make it work. And it's not the other person, it's me. So that's caused some emotional instability, and that's contributed to my drinking also. There's some self-medication there, and there was a lot of trauma attached to it. Some of it that goes all the way back to infancy that I discovered that has fueled my drinking, because most people with substance abuse issues ultimately suffer from PTSD. You're trying to medicate the post-traumatic stress disorder. It's not fun having.
So at what point, like, so you're going through this time period, at what point what's the first time you went to like recovery or rehab or started doing something? At what time were you starting to try to do something about it?
First time I went was 7 years ago, and that went well. And I had over a year of sobriety at one point. And, but I had this conversation with my wife. I mean, I love her, but she's like everyone, you get to know them well enough, there are going to be certain things that you don't like or whatever. Or just some way she talked to me and stuff that didn't sit well with me and make me feel kind of depressed and bad. And my attitude was starting to kind of circle the drain a little bit. And I kind of had an idea where it was going. I didn't want to go there. So I had a conversation with her. We were at a restaurant. Nate was getting ready to do a Christmas Carol show. And I told her, how this was affecting me. And I don't quite know how to describe her response. It was really kind of like deer caught in headlights. She just kind of gave me this and then tried to change the subject. Like what I said I hadn't said it, and that really upset me. So I started crying a little bit. I had to kind of run out of the restaurant, and then she did not make any attempt to change the way she was talking to me. And that just blows my mind. If someone that I care about says something to me that I know is affecting them in a negative way, something I'm doing, the first thing I'm going to do is try to change it. And I've had that with my brother. My brother said something to me, and it just made my heart sink because I didn't even realize I was doing it. But I felt so bad, I changed right away because I felt horrible. I was making him feel that way, So there hasn't been enough communication. And it's really kind of messed with my head at times. But you know what? I'm still standing. And I'm really working on my relationship with God and Jesus for the first time in a long time. Maybe if ever, to tell you the truth. I mean, I've been to a lot of church, but not church like I go to down here. This is a living, breathing thing down here. People take it seriously, and they live their lives in accordance to the teachings of Jesus, and not like being hung up on like what I shouldn't do. It's not that sort of faith. It's like, what do I do? That's a different thing.
We'll talk some more about some of the experiences you've had and kind of what you're exploring with your faith, and anything else you feel like sharing there.
I've never been to churches that were so focused on the Holy Spirit. Maybe you just find that more down here than you do up north. I mean, usually the Holy Spirit is kind of like, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Whereas the Spirit here is openly embraced and celebrated. And I've been to services where I've experienced the Holy Spirit, and it's disarming when you're new to this stuff, because you have to reorganize the way you deal with the world and what you accept as being possible. Because frankly, once you start trying to live through and in the Spirit, for a spirit to come to you, you do have to you have to check some logic at the door, because you're going to see and experience some things that you couldn't explain through natural methods. You know, I find that to be true.
Yeah, when you're a really smart guy, so I mean,
Oh, stop it.
that's probably been challenging for you to.
It is. Well, thank you for the compliment, and that actually can be a hindrance in recovery too. I mean, I've had several people. They tell me the hardest people to get long-term sobriety with a lot of times are also the smartest, because they have a tendency to want to question everything, which is something I do. But I'm starting to question less and accept more.
That's good.
Yeah, makes life a little simpler.
Yeah. So you'd mentioned before that the last 2 years specifically have been maybe the hardest of your entire life. Is that safe to say or no?
Oh, no, that's totally safe to say. I mean, I've been adrift. I mean, I've been homeless at times. Had to sleep on the sidewalk in some shelters under the stars a few times. Not a lot. I'm not like chronically homeless. I don't want anyone to think that. But I have been in that situation and really close to it a lot of times. It's been rough. It's affected my relationship with my son. And when I do talk to my wife, I try to go in and be positive and stuff, but I usually end up getting yelled at for an hour straight. And that's her idea of counseling, is it gives her ability to yell at me for an hour straight. Whereas I think we're supposed to be talking about stuff, and I'm feeling a little self-conscious, like I'm trying to put all the blame on her for this. It's not. I'm the one that drinks. That is my responsibility. I pick up the bottle. I've been put in situations where it's high risk, and it wasn't my choice. I get out of rehab, instead of being able to come home, I was isolated in a hotel room for a week. And isolation is like the one thing they tell you to absolutely not do coming out of inpatient. But that was not my choice. I was put there, and I relapsed. I mean, it was a situation that made it highly probable that was going to happen. And I wasn't able to resist it, because frankly, I was so depressed and felt frankly rejected. I still feel rejected by my family, but not by my friends down here. Absolutely not. I feel absolutely embraced, which is great.
When's the last time you've spoken with your family?
It's been a while. Ever since I got served with divorce papers, which was on December 23rd, Merry Christmas. And then shortly after that, I found out she had an affair. I don't know what I'd say to her at this point. I want to talk to her, but I almost feel like someone needs to talk to her on my behalf at first, to give her an update to the changes I've made here and the impact and the reception I've had, so she knows there's been some positive stuff going on in my life, and maybe set the table for what I want to talk to her about. A big thing right now is I do need to talk to someone. I don't want to miss this high school graduation. I really don't. I mean, I don't want to miss it, and I don't want him to think that I didn't care, because I do. But all that stuff, and it's been hard, but it led me here. And I'm trying to be as proactive as I can down here getting situated. I want to stay here. I need some help in those efforts. And I really want to start getting back to work. I want to start helping the population that needs me down here. I really do. It'd be like a new mission for me because I'm going into a new market, and I can kind of maybe get back in touch with the way I was at the very beginning of my teaching career when I noticed that these kids were not getting offered what they really need. I can bring that fight here. So beware, fellow voice teachers, I'm after you. Well, I am, but I'm not. I'm not going to be mean.
You're a collaborator.
Yeah.
So what's your plan for getting your life back?
Well, I've done fairly well with the sobriety thing since I got out, but I haven't been perfect. And there's been a few times recently I wasn't perfect. I've gotten back on track. I've addressed that behavior. I drank for a few days is what I'm trying to say. I do think I need a refresher. So that's part of the reason we're here and trying to get into a rehab facility outside of Nashville. And it's one geared towards artists and musicians. And I think that would be the perfect environment for me. Because one of the let's just put it out there, artists and creatives are different. Any of you know any of us, we're the guys you call weird. So we're fine with that. I spent a lot of my time in rehab with people just trying to figure me out because I'm not around a lot of people like that, and they're not used to being around people like me. So I bring something to the table that they may not be all that familiar with. And I spend a lot of time just trying to get people to kind of get to know me in a sense. I won't have that issue here. I'll be able to go in and just start really focusing on the work right away because artists get other artists and we crave to be around other artists because that's our family. That's our family. And we always feel more comfortable around your family. I'd like to bring this up just for everyone's sake, because this is something new in the field of addiction that people are just starting to talk about, even though frankly it should have been obvious from day one. It's the role that trauma plays in addiction. Unaddressed childhood pain leads to trauma. Unaddressed trauma leads to PTSD. Unaddressed PTSD leads to addiction. Almost everyone you know that has a problem with substances has a problem with some sort of serious trauma at some point. And if you're going to be effective, from my experience dealing with PTSD, you try to have to get to where did it all start? What was the trauma that started this response where I view the whole world through traumatized lenses and affects my decision-making process? Well, for me, it started in infancy. I'm not going to bore you with the story, but it truly did go back to infancy in a medical condition that caused me great pain. And that just started put me behind the eight ball with how I interacted with the world from a very early age. So if you don't deal with that stuff eventually, I can guarantee you someday you're going to be sitting in a chair in a music studio in Oklahoma City being asked questions about it. You're going to end up with a problem, is what I'm saying. And part of that, as parents, is if you think, address it. If a child's truly been hurt, you got to deal with it, address it, so that it doesn't keep going down this linear path and ends up being an issue when they're older. You got to deal with it when they're a kid so they can move on. So really pay a close attention to your kids and make sure that if there is something like that going on, like if they're being bullied or they've been especially sexually abused or something, you got to address that. And as parents, if you think your kid is a bully, you have to address that. Having been someone that was bullied a lot as a child, your child is messing up another person's future. They are. That thing is the ghosting machine the rest of your life. So you got to get your kid help, because that should not be permitted to persist.
I have to ask fifth of the questions. I probably have to ask somebody else. Yeah, that's a good because you can take it and you answer the next question. The next question.
Well, this is the one time my tendency to go on too long serves me.